morning. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here and to see some familiar faces and some new faces. So my name is Hedy Chang. Some of you know I've had, I think, a couple different lives now here in California. I used to direct a nonprofit called California Tomorrow, was at the Haas Junior Fund, brief stint at the Lucille Packard Foundation a long time ago, but in the last years I've come to really focus on this issue of school attendance and chronic absence, which has a lot to do with health, and we'll talk about some of those connections, but actually a lot more about, if you think about health as a broad sense of school community health. And it is really my pleasure to be able to join you here. And I actually run a national initiative. I'm part of something that's called the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which Ralph Smith at the Annie Casey Foundation has helped to launch, which really looks at if we're going to change what's outcomes for kids and families, we've got to look at making sure that kids are prepared and ready to read by the end of third grade so they can be prepared and ready to succeed in life. In any case, you can go to attendanceworks.org to find out more information. And now we will see if I can figure out how to use the slides. So with that, let me just give a brief frame around this, because I find that often when you say the words attendance, everyone's eyes glaze over because they don't understand really why it matters to them when it's actually pretty critically important to school success and success later on. And you think about this is something that we did with America's Promise. In order to succeed in school, you need attendance every day, achievement every year, and attainment every time. And attendance every day is important for achievement every year because you need the time in class to benefit from the instruction. But it's also about attainment over time, because over time, attendance is about persistence and a life skill. And you know what? When you show up to school, and you learn to show up to school even when you're not feeling quite like being there, you learn to show up to work even when you don't feel quite like being there. The challenge we have is when we say the words attendance, we often mean different things, and we actually don't understand that our different measures, we're going to be talking a lot about data, actually ask different questions. Average daily attendance is what a lot of us are familiar with because it's how schools are funded. And it's really about the typical number of kids who show up any day to a school, because we need to know how many desks do we need to have? How many books do we have, given the typical number of kids who show up? And then there's truancy, which is the kids who are missing school without permission of an adult. And we need to be able to make sure that we stop kids from skipping school. And we have a whole compulsory ed law that in California that is about truancy. You should know, though, that truancy is defined differently by every state. In California, we have a low-level truancy measure because that was how we're using to prevent kids from missing too much school. Kids who are missing any 3 days unexcused, that's truancy in California, or 3 days late, 30 minutes. Other states have truancy as any kid missing 20 days or 10 days unexcused absences. They're really different measures. So when you say truancy, by the way, wherever you are, we may not even be meaning the same thing. And what I focus in on is chronic absence, because for me, chronic absence, and this is based on research that I'll show you, is an indication that a child has missed so much school that they are at risk. They're academically at risk, and often it is a sign of other risks going on in their family that, or community that are keeping them from going to school. Oops. Okay, we'll figure this out. So this is actually data from San Mateo and Santa Clara. Guess what? If kids are chronically absent, missing 10% or more, in kindergarten and first, they are very unlikely to read at grade level by the end of third grade. Only 17% of the kids who were chronically absent in kindergarten and first were reading at grade level by the end of third grade. 64% of the kids who showed up at least 95% of the time were reading at grade level. And what this shows is kids, you have been an incredible set of work down here around making sure kids are school ready, right? Lots of investments. This top line here, the blue line, is the kids who come into school ready based on your school readiness assessment. But look what happens if they're chronically absent. They're not reading at grade level by the end of third grade. It's also challenging to notice the kids who didn't come into school ready never got to reading at grade level, even with good attendance. I don't think this is about the ability of 5-year-olds to learn to read, by the way. This is about our inability to create school environments which can address the needs of kids with a diverse set of learning needs. And we don't have the ability right now to help those kids who are already a little behind when we get into school. And that's a shame, because they're only 5 years old. What we know in Baltimore is this issue of a habit of attendance. Let me just say one thing. This is particularly about low-income kids, although it can affect around the habit issue for middle-income kids. Where do you think low-income kids learn to read? Anywhere. School, right? Because often they don't have the resources to have books in their environment. So if they're not in school, we know the impact on their reading is even greater. In Baltimore, and these are mostly low-income kids in Baltimore, if kids were chronically absent in pre-K, and then pre-K and K, they were 50% likely to be chronically absent in K and first. They had worse third-grade outcomes, higher likelihood of being retained by the third grade, and you know retention in the early grades is a surefire sign that a kid may not make it through school, and they're much more likely to be identified for special ed. The good news was that the kids in Head Start attended better and did better by the end of third grade. So we also know this is a solvable problem. This is looking at that long-term impact. We know from data nationally, chronic absence in kindergarten predicts lower fifth grade outcomes even when kids' attendance improved in third grade. If you miss too much of the base in kindergarten and first, it's pretty hard to make up because we don't have the resources to help kids make up these days. And it's particularly challenging for low-income kids because they are most likely to face the kind of challenges: unaffordable housing, lack of access to health care, living in environmentally screwed up neighborhoods, which give them more health problems, which mean they're likely to be chronically absent in both kindergarten and first, or pre-K and K, whichever you want to look at it. This is data from Oregon. So California, we don't even have attendance in our longitudinal student database. All we know is whether kids graduated and whether they drop out. We don't even know whether they attended enough school in order to succeed. But in the states that do, the data shows exactly what we're seeing. This is Oregon data. If you were having poor attendance in kindergarten, poor attendance in fifth grade, it showed up in worse outcomes later on. And we know from Chicago data that by ninth grade, so by the way, I think this is an issue. When kids are in the early grades, there's a group of kids we miss. We lose them in kindergarten and first because they never got to school enough to learn how to read. Then they're in school. Their attendance improves in third grade, but they can't read to learn. So even though they're in their seats, they may be falling behind. By sixth grade, those kids are the hardest to pull back because they require so much remediation. There are other kids, though, who come online in sixth grade and in ninth grade, and by middle school, this is a lot about kids learning of a habit and persistence and knowing to show up. And there are also health issues and other issues that can affect them, but we know by ninth grade, because you know what, by ninth grade, you start to need to learn to show up to class, to pass classes, right? And by college, that's going to be very true. By ninth grade, chronic absence starts to predict whether or not you'll graduate or attendance better than eighth grade test scores. So this is both about time on task and a habit of persistence. One of our challenges is average daily attendance, which is what we've usually looked at with schools, can really mask chronic absence. This is data from 6 elementary schools in Oakland. They all have 95% attendance. One has less than 6% chronically absent kids, and one has almost 1 out of 5 of its kids. So these are 6 elementary schools. One has low levels of chronic absence, and one has 1 out of 5 of its kids. How can that be? Think of a school that has 200 kids, okay? This is our math test for the day. 190 kids show up, 10 kids don't show up. The 10 kids who don't show up are, by the way, not the same kids all year long, right? They'd be disenrolled from school. The question is, the 10 missing seats, are they made up of all 200 kids missing a couple of days? Are they made up of, let's say, 60 out of your 200 kids, each missing about a month of school? And then there'll still be absences left over for other kids to have. This is the difference between aggregate statistics and a statistic that is looking at what's happening to individual kids. It's kind of like test scores, why we don't like aggregate test scores, but we want to look at sort of improvement of individual kids and how much you're adding value. This is the same concept. And then the other challenge we have is truancy, and particularly for young kids, whom, by the way, health issues can be a really serious issue. This is San Francisco data. If you look at the kids who are chronically habitually truant, so in San Francisco, this is around kids who are missing about 10 days on excused absences. In kindergarten, notice they identify about 300 kids. They look at chronic absence, you identify about 600 kids. 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds are often not missing school without some adult knowing they're home. And you can miss a lot of school for what we consider are very legitimate reasons. Your parents are worried you have asthma. They don't want to send you to school. The parents are worried because the kid shows up and says, "Mommy, I've got a stomach ache." How many of you have kindergartners? And when they're anxious about going to school, what do they always say? "Mommy, I have a stomach ache." Do parents know that for a very mild stomach ache like that, maybe the best solution is get them to school versus to keep them home? What you can see, though, is that if you start, and we know that chronic absence in kindergarten starts to predict poor outcomes. If you use chronic absence to identify who you need to talk to, you'll get a very different number than just looking at truancy. So in Oakland, we looked at chronic absence data. You can see it's about 1 out of 7 kids in 2009-10 were chronically absent. This is a typical curve and pattern. Highest in kindergarten and first, gets better, and then at the transition years and in 9th grade you see higher levels. By the way, the drop at the end is not necessarily a good sign. It could mean the poorest attenders are actually dropping out. There's a recent study that just got released last week by Get Schooled and Bob Balfans at Johns Hopkins, and Bob is estimating between 5 and 7.5 million kids in the United States. That's like every kid in California is missing a month or more of school in this country. And we have not been looking at the data to know that it's even a problem. We have the data. Teachers take attendance every day. And it's usually, in most places, electronically recorded. But we are not using it or monitoring it, either by individual kid or school level. It's beginning to change, and in California there are places that are changing, but this has largely been the norm. Oops, sorry. The issue is that when we can use data, we can use it strategically to identify issues and identify solutions. If you see that chronic absence is concentrated in a particular place, you can ask why. You can figure out, is it unreliable transportation? Is it lack of access to health care? Is it over-suspension of kids for really stupid reasons that they shouldn't be kept out of school? Is it the lack of an engaging curriculum? All of those issues can be at hand when you look at data. And if you find a place that has lots of low-income kids but low levels of chronic absence, you can use it to figure out what are the good practices that could be emulated. So this is in Oakland, and you can see chronic absence isn't an issue in every school in Oakland. It is more of an issue in a number of schools. And you can use this to start figuring out, where do I need to target resources? And in Oakland, when we looked at chronic absence, it was especially concentrated in certain neighborhoods. It was especially concentrated in West Oakland, which has all the issues. They don't even have a low-cost grocery store where kids can get access, families can access to decent costing groceries so that kids can eat nutrition, and have good nutrition. Why do we think chronic absence is a problem in Oakland or in West Oakland? Because there's community health issues that are going on, and it means you need a community solution with the kind of stakeholders who are in a room like we have here to address it. The good news is we know that chronic absence is a completely solvable problem. You can partner with community aid. So I also got a chance to go into Oakland and look at the best practice schools. They're partnering with community agencies to help families carry out their responsibilities. One school, for example, has mental health partnerships. Because you know what? If a kid's having having challenges and chronically absent, and you're a teacher with 25 kids, it's not like either you have the training, the skills, or the time to go and find out what's happening with that kid so you can figure out what are the issues that could change whether they go to school or not. You need community agencies to help with that kind of work, or if it is health issues, especially given the fact, like, my kids are in the public schools, we don't have a school nurse who does anything more than just check immunization problems. You gotta make attendance a priority, a community priority. We have to have set targets, we gotta monitor progress over time, and we have to let everyone in the community see the data so they can see where our resources are needed and see if things can be improved. But the good news is, you know what? You take attendance every day. At the end of the month, you can see whether you're doing better. At the end of the semester, you can see. How many things can you actually track progress in a very short period of time? And I've been working with community after community. New York City, it's huge, but they have 50 pilot schools, and they're all seeing improvements in attendance because they've made a concerted effort. If you can do that in New York City, we can do it here. You have to engage parents and students in identifying and addressing the conditions and why they're not getting to school. I know a school in Providence, one of the reasons why about 25 kids were not getting to school is their parents were working the night shift, and they would fall asleep exhausted before they could get their kids to school in the morning. So what's the solution? An early morning breakfast club. Drop off before you fall asleep. We can come up with solutions, but it's not just looking at individual kids, it's looking at what are our issues as a community. We got to create expectations around attendance. We got to begin early, ideally in pre-K. This is about having a holistic response that combines universal prevention. It is a public health model with more intensive supports for the kids who need it most, and it has to be about positive supports before punitive action. We know that there are typically 3 reasons why kids miss school. Discretion. Parents don't know it matters. Aversion. Kids struggling academically can be a bullying issue, by the way. Or barriers. You have to know which is going on in order to have an adequate solution. So what we've been talking about is there are 4 things that any school community can do. You can recognize good and improved attendance, because you want to build a culture of attendance, and by the way, it helps make sure your teachers are taking attendance accurately even in their busy day. Because I can't give Jolene an attendance award if David actually showed up better. Because Jolene's going to call me to task when I don't take the attendance correctly. It's my hope in the attendance awards. We have to have parent engagement and youth engagement. We have to have personalized early outreach, talking to kids. Kids come to school because they're in caring relationships. And you know who some of the best people to do personalized early outreach are? Nurses. Because they can call families, they can say your kid was sick, is anything the matter? They can provide the kind of supports. I know a school nurse who single-handedly in North Carolina improved ADA in 2 schools by calling all the kids who were 10% chronically absent and their parents were saying that they were sick. She said 40% of the kids weren't sick. And what she had to do was educate them about the importance of attendance. She also said, you know what, now that we have thermometers that are all these electronic ones, no one's taking their kid's temperature before deciding before they should keep them home or send them to school. Because their thermometers all ran around out of the batteries. If we just got people to take their temperature and know that you should send your kid to school as long as they don't have a temperature, we might actually solve some of this issue. And we have to have attendance data teams that are looking at the data and aggregating the information, so if what we need is a programmatic solution, we can figure out how to put it in place. So this is really about taking this 3-tiered approach. This isn't rocket science. It makes total common sense. The challenge is we haven't been using the data in the right way. And we need it for everyone in a community to come together around this. And you know what? It's one of the few things where there is broad-scale agreement. I know as a parent that when I try to talk to my classroom teachers, sometimes it's not the easiest if I'm worried about the curriculum, because they wonder about, what do I know about instruction? What's my educational background? But you know what? Around attendance, everyone will agree. As a community, we have to work together to improve attendance. So this is my suggestion for you guys to think about in your county. Think about focusing on chronic absence. It's an early warning sign. We've got to address these issues. We've got to go upstream. It's cheaper to go upstream, by the way. Taking kids to court is really expensive. It's predictive of academic failure. If you improve attendance, you will improve achievement, which is what schools are held accountable for. I guarantee you that it's pretty tough to improve achievement if the kids aren't there in the classroom. And this is available, easily understood. And it's a potentially shared outcome that can really help to motivate, inspire, and monitor the progress of a collaborative effort. Thank you. So,
Can I ask one or two questions?
Sure. Kathleen asked me if I could do it in 25 minutes. She's never heard me talk at the pace I speak at. So, are there any questions, thoughts? Does this resonate? Others?
Can we get a copy of that?
A copy of the PowerPoint?
It'll be on our...
It will be on their website. And I also want to say I have tons of materials. Like, I worked with Reach Out and Read. We have materials for parents in English and Spanish. Just go to www.attendanceworks.org. But this very particular PowerPoint is something that will be on the website. And your website is, Kathleen?
healthyfamilyfund.org.
healthyfamilyfund.org.
And there'll be your YouTube, too.
Okay, and there'll be a YouTube. Over here.
Are these efforts paid by the school district, or is this a nonprofit?
Attendance Works is a nonprofit. But, you know, we're a tiny little nonprofit. We're a national, I mean, we work nationally, but to do the work is actually, the work itself has to be incorporated and be part of the school district. And I work nationally at 3 levels, building awareness, but I work with the state campaign with a whole coalition of groups here in California. I try and nurture other state campaigns because some of this is about state attendance law. But here in California, I work most in depth with Oakland Public Schools in San Francisco, and then I provide support to some other districts as well. And sometimes my TA is funded by foundations, but a lot of the work, like in San Francisco, where I'll admit I partly volunteer my time because my kids are in the public schools, it's really about the school district having made this a priority and investing in their resources. At least on the data monitoring side and sharing the data. I mean, schools have to first get the data, collect the data, and share it. And then, then you use the data to think about how do you redeploy resources. I mean, this is not an era when we're certainly not getting more resources into kids these days. The question is, how do you make most effective use of current resources? And then in New York City, one of the huge resources they use is volunteers. They use City Year, they use Experience Corps type, they use social work interns, they use seniors mentoring freshmen, and their attendance mentors and buddies for each other. We've got to really think creatively about what resources we can use to deploy that. But I will say, the success mentors in New York City, in order to make them work, you have to be in a relationship with that kid over a year. You can't have, you know, this is relationship building. You have to have access to the data in a school, and you have to be part of a school team. You can't have, you know, volunteers running amok on a school campus. That doesn't get you anywhere. It's when they're part of an integrated approach on a school team. And I will say the key, most important factor in making sure, at least in schools, that this works is your principal. Do principals get this? Do they prioritize this? Do they know how to organize their faculty and their community partners to address this issue? And that's been a common characteristic of every school that I've been to that I call, you know, a bright spot or a community solution, because they in fact show lower levels of chronic absence despite serving large numbers of low-income kids. Can I do one more? Yep.
You mentioned about encouraging kids to come to school and having attendance awards. Where does the recently I've seen a lot of districts who are using the district attorney to try to encourage parents to bring kids. How does that fit into your strategies, or doesn't it?
Oops, sorry. It does.
You need to repeat the question.
Okay. Let me see if I can get back to a screen. The question is, how does the efforts around using a district attorney to get parents to ensure kids go to school fit within the strategy? It is part of the strategy. It's a strategy of last resort for me. So if you look, it's at the recovery part. It's referral as a last resort for court-based intervention. I consider court-based intervention part of when you use the district attorney and when all else has failed. You've tried the positive supports, you've tried working with the parents, you may in fact for some parents have to take legal action. And a lot of times, you know, the court-deferred approach is, you threaten them with a stick and you provide them with case management as support even at that end. But the challenge I have is that because we're not using chronic absence, because we're not building a culture of attendance, we have way too many kids for whom we're trying legal action as a solution. And now the courts are overwhelmed because there are too many kids for them to serve. When we could have, if we had done more of the universal and the early outreach programs, reached a whole bunch of kids before we even need to use courts as a solution. Although for some families that may in fact be in order, sometimes that threat can be a useful piece. So one thing I just want to share that the School Attendance Review Board for the state, which I sit on, has just released a new manual, a new SARB handbook, which incorporates chronic absence as one of the components of a very comprehensive approach that starts with prevention and early intervention and then again uses legal action as a last resort. Thank you.